Hi guys, today we'll be looking at the Caro Kann defense. There are many variations to it, and this is a very famous uh, defense for black. Let's look at the variations one by one. Let's start with the first and most common variation. So, white moves pawn to e4, and black responds with pawn to c5. c5 is the basic Caro Kann defense start, and to gain center control, white plays pawn to d4 and black responds with pawn to d5. So this is to attack the e4 pawn, and the most common move for white is knight to c3. This both attacks the d5 pawn and supports the e4 pawn. Black generally takes, white takes too, and then black responds with bishop to f5, attacking the knight. Knight moves to knight moves to g3, attacking the bishop. The bishop will want to remain at this square, at this diagonal, because it's a very strong diagonal for black. So it moves back. White moves pawn to h4. This might look like it's disturbing the pawn formation here, but the main intention is to move pawn to h5 and drive this bishop away, because this bishop is a big threat as it controls this strong diagonal. Black responds with pawn to h6, so that there's space for bishop to move if attacked. Then white plays knight f3, then knight to d7. So the main reason for moving knight to d7 is this kind of opens another option for black. Now black can also do the queen side castling and the king side castling. So there are two different options for black. So white wants to drive this bishop away. So moves pawn to h6. Bishop goes back to h7. And in order to get rid of this bishop, white moves bishop to d3, and you can move your pawns up, but the best move is to exchange the bishops, because moving the pawns up will just uh, will spoil the pawn formation. So the best move is taking the bishops, and white takes with queen to the queen, and now black moves to e6. So this the opens up space for the black squared bishop to come, and the queen now has two options to either start attacking from this side or start attacking from this side. So this is the main variation played. Let's look at the second variation. So second variation starts and knight is moved to c3 and exchanged, exchanged, and knight is moved to d7. So the main reason is to next move knight to f6, and if white like exchanges knights, this knight will come back to knight f3, so the queen side knight ends up near the king side, and this will the knight will then control the e4 spot, which is a very strong spot. So this is one opening, and white generally moves knight to g5. So this is actually an opening that's not recommended for black, especially for beginners, because This can, you know, there's no more knight exchange, and this knight can create trouble with many traps. So this is not an opening. This variation is not recommended for black, especially for beginners. Let's look at the next variation, where knight to c3, knight takes, and knight to f6. White generally takes the exchange. Now there are two variations. You can either take with the g7 pawn or the e7 pawn. So if we take it with the g7 pawn, there are two advantages. There's one main advantage is to move your rook here and attack, like control this open flank. But the main disadvantage is it like deforms the pawns, and kingside castling won't be a good idea now because of the pawn formation. So if we take, it's better to take it with the e7 pawn. This lets gives us an option for kingside castling as the pawns are still in a decent formation, and it opens up for the bishop to come and attack and develop. This is one variation. Let's look at the next variation. So the next variation is after pawn to d5, instead of taking the pawn, instead of moving knight to c3, white moves uh, to white moves to e5, and black responds with bishop to f5, controlling this diagonal, and white moves the general c3 move, and black responds with e6, and then knight white just moves to g4 to attack this bishop, and the bishop will go back, and white can start attacking and drive this bishop, and at the end exchange. This actually leaves no option for white to castle on the king's side, but it kind of doesn't let black also castle, because you can see that white's already gotten his pawns forward and is ready to attack. So castling kingside for black also could be a bad choice, as the pawns are already out at up front. So white can make an attack on the king's side. Let's look at the final variation. So white moves e5, and black responds with c5. So we are sacrificing this pawn to get a positional advantage, but we can easily get this pawn later too. So if white kills it, then black moves e6. If you notice this is just the French defense. So the bishop will come and take this pawn soon if white supports the pawn, as I showed you in the earlier the French defense video. It's not a great move to support this pawn, as you can look at the previous video and see how it causes trouble. So this will actually be good for black, as white generally wouldn't support this pawn because it's a bad move, and will continue with his development, and black can move his bishop. This both gets your pawn back and develops your bishop. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe for more chess videos.